right, guys, and welcome back to Ask an Autistic. Today we have everybody, a panel, you can see everyone. We don't usually do that, but we'll do that for today. So my name is Jessica Leichtweisz. I'm the CEO of Hope Education Services. I've been working with kids with autism for the past, it'll be 13 years in September, which makes me feel super old. But I have some amazing friends with me, some parents, some friends of mine, panelists, then they come every week. You know, you can come on and you can ask them your questions, get your questions answered, and we'll go with that. So welcome, and if any parent is on here today and wants to ask a question, we'd be more than happy to answer it.
I have a question. My question is about stimming. I guess my question is, my son does it. He does it all the time in different ways, and it changes from day to day. So my kind of a two-part question, what does stimming do for you? Like, how does it physically make you feel? So I can kind of understand what sensation that's giving him. And then secondly, how did you come to figuring out what you like to do for your stimming, if you do it, and any just interesting information you have to share on it? I just think it's super interesting how it can change my son's entire mood. So.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we've tackled the topic of should you let your child stim, but we've never really got into why do you do it and did you choose it or how did you choose it? That's a fantastic question, Lisa. I don't know. I've never heard anyone talk about that. So I'm excited we'll be the first people to really bring that up. And I just want to recognize all the panelists because you guys are pioneers. This is not done. This has never been done before. You know, look at the history of autism, starting off in such a dark place. Now professionals and the autistic community were uniting and talking. It's beautiful. So Michele, you always get to answer first. You always get to come on first. Michele is the most organized and time efficient person I know. So Michele, you get to answer that first. Do you do stimming? Did you do stimming? How did it come about? And what did you feel?
Thank you, Jessica. That's a really good question, Lisa, because I used to stim a lot more in my younger days. I used to spin in circles. I would be pacing myself back and forth as one of the things, because for me it was just really calming for me. I know it's different for everybody and stuff, but it's just for me, it was calming as a way of not letting the environment get overwhelming to me. So that's why stimming helped me a lot. And today it's more of if I need to squeeze my hands to relax myself and everything from stress and stuff. So that would be my answer for this, really.
Yeah, thank you. And so did you choose intentionally your stim, or did it just feel natural, it came naturally to you?
A lot of it was just natural. I wasn't really too especially in my younger days, I wasn't really too aware of it. I think more now, when I squeeze my hand, I do it for a reason now, but it was just, it was just more natural for me. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So Jeff, what about you? Did you stim before, and how did it come to you doing the stimming? What stim did you pick? All the questions.
I mean, it depends on, it depends on what the situation is. Sometimes I will stim, I will flap my hands sometimes, and I will also, and then I'll also kind of, I do a lot of back and forth pacing, and I mean, that sort of thing. And then for the most part, I'll do a lot of, I'll have fidget spinners. Sometimes I'll use a fidget spinner. I have 3 of them. And then I also do a lot of pounding on socks and stress balls and all that. I mean, so those are kind of my stimming slash stress relievers. But I mean, if I had to recommend a particular stimming, I would definitely recommend maybe get a dry sponge, and your child can pound on it as a way of not only stimming, but also relieving stress and anxiety.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jeff. That's really good advice. So Kevin, do you want to answer this question?
Yeah. So kind of like Michelle, I don't really stim much these days, but when I was a kid, you know, I did it a lot. When I was a lot younger, I did it a lot, and I had a variety of things I would do. I used to sometimes would like fill buckets up with water and would be like playing with the water, watching the bubbles, and I would like sometimes out or be outside like taking a stick and, you know, kind of playing with the leaves or pine needles or snow, things like that. Or sometimes I might take a wooden spoon and be like waving putting a napkin at the end of it, waving it like I was a flag. That was all stuff I did a lot of when I was growing up and during my childhood years mostly. And I think the purpose is it's kind of, there was something calming about it. And kind of, I also had specific things I'd be doing while doing it. And it usually involved like replaying like one of my favorite movies or TV shows in my head. Or as I got into sports, I would be like replaying a lot of the old, you know, games in my head, like reliving all the old highlights in my head while doing it. And I can't really say why, you know, stimming while doing that really like I felt the need to stim while doing that, but other than that was just it was just somehow helped me really like get in that kind of moment. So that's pretty much what stimming was like for me. And I kind of it was something I'll say I gradually grew out of as I got older and entered my adult years. And right now, yeah, the only stimming you'll really see for me, I think, is like when I get excited, you'll see some exaggerated mannerisms like what Jeff talked about. I will from time to time might do the hand flapping or rocking, you know, in moments where I'm, you know, that bring about extra excitement for me.
Yeah, and so Kevin, in the chat, Lisa's asking a follow-up question, and that's like, why do you feel like you grew out of it? Like, why do you think kids do it more when they're kids and less when they're adults?
Wish I kind of knew the answer to that, other than I think there is actually probably something of natural maturation, you know, that I probably naturally maybe grew out of it. But I will also say, come to think of it, as I was when I entered my teen years, I did become more self-conscious and therefore try to do it. Although I still did it, when I was a kid, I wasn't as self-conscious about doing it in front of other people. But when I became a teenager, I kind of entered, you know, that adolescence, the phase where you get more self-conscious. I did become more self-conscious about doing it in front of people. So would kind of look to only do it when I was alone in private, you know, more. But now, even when I'm alone, I don't feel like I do it all that much. And I can't really say definitively how I got there to the point where I hardly ever do it anymore, other than just grow out of it kind of naturally at my own pace. And I think that was, and I do encourage, probably he may grow out of it, but you got to let him do it at his own pace. I think, you know, you can't, you gotta, you know, I think, yeah, probably given how stressful the world can be for someone who has autism, I would recommend, at least to an extent, allowing him to engage in the stimming and kind of don't rush him to grow out of it.
Yeah, I mean, in the chat, there's like a discussion. I know Monica's saying it's because people mask, and it makes me so sad to hear that. Joe, you put something in the chat, and I know you're not technically registered to be on the panel. Would you like to, and you do not have to, but would you like to unmute and share anything about this? If you do, just unmute and share, and if not, you don't have to.
Thanks, Jessica. As for like stimming, what I did, same with Michelle and Kevin, I grew out of it eventually, but what I did was I would pace around the room, I would move my arms around, I wouldn't sit still. And over time, when I entered my middle school years, I just sort of stopped because, like I said in the chat over here, even with Monica, what she said, because it isn't socially acceptable, like I just couldn't do it in front of people. So what I did was just do it in private. Over time, I found something that that could like, that could, what do you say, calm me down, or just, you know, yeah, just not make me move around as much. Like music, I'm a musician. I found drumming in my high school years, and that kind of helped me out because I'm moving around all the time, and it's a good thing for me. I mean, music just calms me down whenever I stim. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, it's interesting because some people in the group were talking about the stimming calming them down. So you're talking about the stimming actually making you overly excited and the music calming you down. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
So it's interesting because I have the experience of some kids who seem to stim that I work with in order to calm themselves. And I have some kids that seem to stim when they're like overly excited. And it's interesting to really hear different people say, you know, there are different reasons why kids do it and people stim, not just kids, but people stim. And it's interesting because we observe that, but it's very hard. In ABA, my background is in ABA, and I use a very holistic approach, and I'm very different than many other ABA therapists, and I'm not a BCBA for that reason. I probably would have been kicked off of the board after 5 minutes. But you know, Monica's giving me a thumbs up. So the reality of it is that we talk about this being a private event where you can't ask somebody because it's in their head. I mean, you can't know the reason a person does something because it's in their head. I actually think that's kind of stupid. You could know if you asked them. I mean, that's the reality, right? So, and it's interesting that you're kind of saying, and I love that's what we're doing here, is like asking you, and you're giving one answer, and Michelle's giving another answer, and it's beautiful to see that it really is for different reasons, because I think that if professionals really like accept the fact that people stim for different reasons, then I think that they'll start to understand that you have to treat it differently. And I don't say treat it as in like treat stimming, but I mean you have to respond to it. That's probably a better word. You respond to it differently. So that's beautiful, thank you. And Michelle, did you have a similar experience to why you think you kind of grew out of the stimming as well?
I think it was just basically what everybody was saying, like it just over time, it just like naturally like grew out for me. Like I think for the longest time I wasn't like, I think it took me a lot longer though to like, I was always a bubbly person. Like you have no idea. I think it just took me a while, like just naturally like just growing out of it really. Like I'm like really honest and I don't like hide too much I don't really hide things really. And I just like, that's how open I am. Like, I really am like an open person. I just, you know, for me, it's like, you know, I just think that just how things like, as I gotten older and everything, it just like, you know.
Yeah, sometimes you just don't feel the need to do that anymore. You know, it's interesting because when I was a child, my mother, I remember my mother used to yell at me all the time because she said I would like blink my eyes repetitively and be like, and I actually would not know what she was talking about. And I would just like tell her, and this is an interesting story. So I would like tell her, like, I'm not. And I would cry and she would yell at me and like put me in my room because I wasn't listening to her. And like years later in my 30s, that same thing started to happen. And it was like, because I have a neurological condition, it's like an eye twitch. So my mom like thought I was just blinking my eyes repetitively, but it was literally like a muscle just like twitching. And it's interesting because then it sounds like kind of silly, but it's like as sometimes we, you know, as we think that like something, we just look at someone and we assume something about it, and that you can't do that. And sometimes like we have to just listen to what kids are saying. So I think it's beautiful that you like do not mask yourself. I think that's wonderful. I think most people aspire to do that. I can't say I completely am. I'm doing my best to be vulnerable and authentic and relatable and accepting and loving. Those are like the core values of how I live my life. And I think hopefully you guys can see that from even just being the ABA professional who was willing to say, yeah, you're right, we're making a mistake, let's fix that. But, you know, it's not always easy because I still worry sometimes about what people think. But thank you. I'm glad you don't have that experience. So Monica, I know your experience was a little bit different than Michelle's, and I would love for you to share your perspective.
Oh, I'm not even muted. Sorry, guys. So I actually have a whole video about, kind of without saying it, about the science behind why we stim. We as humans, not we as autistics, because all humans stim, not just autistics. Neurotypicals stim in a way that is acceptable to the neurotypical community. So there's actually, like, I can send the video to anyone that wants it, or you can email me for it or whatever. It's not publicly accessible. But the basis of it is that your sensory system interacts with your nervous system. And your nervous system tells your endocrine system what hormones to release. So, and in reverse also. So if your endocrine system, if your endocrine system, yes, Michelle, if your endocrine system is, for example, releasing your stress hormone, which is, I just lost the name of it. What is it? I know what it is. Oh my goodness.
Cortisol, is that what you mean?
Yes, that's what I'm looking for. Thank you. So if your endocrine system is releasing cortisol, then your nervous system can say, oh, I'm stressed out. And then your sensory system can respond and stim in a way that can reduce your cortisol levels. Sometimes you can force your body to reduce your cortisol levels. There's one basic thing that works for every human, is to lay with your butt, let your back on the floor, your butt and you're against the wall and your legs straight up. This forces blood to flow back to your vital organs, because when you release cortisol and adrenaline, your blood gets pumped out of your vital organs into your arms and legs so that you can run away. So if you're feeling really stressed and you lay on the floor with your butt against the wall and your legs straight up, put your arms out and breathe, all of the blood has to go back to your vital organs, and it will instantly drop your cortisol levels. And people don't know that, but that's so cool, right? So if you're like freaking out stressed and you have the capacity to be like, listen, I know this is gonna work, and you can make yourself lay on the floor, that will help at least a little bit with every human, because it's just science. You can't make someone do that, because then their cortisol is just going to spike more because they're trapped. But if you can logic yourself into doing it, it helps. That's an example of a calming stim.
No, we actually do that in yoga, and I never would have like referred it to stimming, but we call it grounding, and we do that in yoga class all the time. That's just like, we call it grounding, but it's, yeah.
Right. But we only call it stimming when autistics do it.
Exactly.
Okay, so that is just one example of how that all works. But I have a whole, it's like a 10-minute video all about how you can control your endocrine system, which is where all your hormones are released. All of your endorphins, all your happy hormones, all of that is released through your endocrine system. And you can control your endocrine system by using your sensory system, which autistics are a lot better about doing than neurotypicals. Neurotypicals are much more concerned with how things look. And then as autistics grow up, we also realize that everyone's concerned with how things look, and we should not be responding to our body's needs and instead ignoring them and suppressing them and hiding them, which is why autistic adults stim less.
On the note of that video, did you make that video, or is it something that
No, I made it.
Are you open to us putting it on the channel so parents watching this in recording mode can get it?
We'll link my email and they can ask me for it. It's not I don't have it posted publicly.
Gotcha. No,
So
I meant if
somebody
you
wants
wanted,
to ask me for it.
I
then-
meant if you wanted me to post it on my YouTube
Oh.
channel, or if you wanted to do an interview on my YouTube channel about that.
We'll sort that out later.
Okay.
So that's like a really mini version of that video. But so I think it's a lot more important to understand the why behind the stimming than it is to know the ways in which I personally stim, because that doesn't really matter for Talon or for any other parent that is trying to help their autistic kid stim. So what's important to remember about stimming is harm reduction. So if your kid is stimming by smashing their head against the wall, you need to figure out why that stim works to find a new one that has the same result that's not harmful. So some things, I also have ADHD, in case none of y'all noticed. So I am always moving at least my big toe. I am never completely still unless I'm like actually unconscious, like I faint. So if I'm fainted, I'm not moving my big toe. I had to have an MRI last year post brain injury and a CT scan. And the MRIs of my head, and I was moving my big toe, and the lady like yelled at me and was like, you need to stay completely still. And she was super ticked off. And I started to cry in the MRI machine because for me, being completely still makes my skin literally crawl. Like it's like pins and needles through my whole body. It's painful to be completely still. So those 20 minutes of MRI, I couldn't move and I couldn't actually cry because that's movement. So I'm just laying there alone with tears falling out of my head silently while I get yelled at by a grown lady. So that's an example of something I do. I also rock in the car when I'm listening to music. That's an excited stim. An anxious stim is I pick up the skin on my knuckles and wiggle it around when I'm nervous. That's just like and so a neurotypical behavior that would be an anxious stim is chewing their nails, picking at their cuticles. Those are all neurotypical acceptable stims that no one has an issue with because everyone does it. I have benign cysts in my shins and I will press on those. Like there's all sorts of different things that people do. And I don't think you'll find two neurotypical or two autistic people who are going to stim in the same ways or for the same reasons. But if you can try to figure out why someone's stimming, you can help them to stim in a way that gratifies the need without it being harmful. Any stim that's not harmful should just be left alone for them to do it as they see fit.
Yeah, I agree with that. The only other thing, Monica, and I want to hear your perspective, the other thing I would add is just like, if the stim is so disruptive to other people that it prohibits the person from being in a specific social setting. Like I've worked with kids that, for example, will just like their stimming is to jump up and down and scream very, very loudly. And then it's very difficult for them to be in a classroom because it's extremely distracting to other students. It's very difficult for them to go out to eat because, you know, honestly, if you go out to eat and let's say you're spending $200 on a nice dinner, you expect to be able to talk to the person you're having dinner with in a quiet environment. So, you know, if you go to see a movie, you expect to be able to hear the movie. So it becomes very challenging for that person to be in that situation. So the two things I usually tell parents is like, if it just makes someone uncomfortable, if the kid's just flapping his arms quietly and it makes someone uncomfortable, who cares? Like, honestly, who cares? That their opinion is irrelevant. But if it's to the point where it is like observably disruptive, would you agree that, do you think in that case as well, that it's okay to maybe not prevent the child from stimming, but try to redirect them to a stim that is not as distracting to the people around them?
So I think that there's a lot of weighing cost versus gain with any attempt at altering someone's behavior. So you gave 3 examples, so we'll just go through them. Like, is that child going to be more successful with their education in a classroom environment if if their stims are super physical or super auditory and they are better able to function and focus while engaging in those behaviors, then is it a positive thing for them to be in that classroom without the stim? Probably not. So maybe they should have a separate learning environment where they can stim and also the other kids aren't being distracted or disrupted or whatever. So that's when I'm not about always integration, because I don't like mass education for any child. So that's one. A $200 dinner. No kid wants to sit at a $200 dinner. So that one's kind of out. Like, don't take your kids to a $200 dinner.
Well, but I mean, it honestly, so in Canada, I don't know what the prices are, but I live right outside New York City. You can go to Applebee's and like, if you order like a drink, you can spend $200 for.
No, like $200 is like milestones or the keg, and no one takes their 5-year-old there.
Yeah, I mean, there are like in New Jersey, New York,
Okay,
located,
so,
you could very easily spend $200 on a family of 4 without like eating anything. You know, our salads start at like $25, and then you have to pay to add chicken onto it. So.
Okay, but also like this stim couldn't necessarily like. I'm 28 and I could love to jump and scream as a stim. So let's scratch the 5-year-old thing. If I want to jump and scream, I probably don't want to sit in a restaurant where everybody's got their nose stuck up because they're paying $200 for their meal. Like, that's just not something that I'd be interested in doing. So that's something where you need to have the conversation to weigh the costs and the benefits. If you would like to go here, then you can't do this in that environment. So we need to figure out whether this is something that is going to be a valuable experience for you. If you really want to see this movie, I'll take you, but we need to find a way for you to engage your sensory system in a way that's not disrespectful to the other people in the theater. And like, it's kind of like, is it worth it to stop them? Because I get that, like, autistics can't run the world. Like, well, maybe we're president someday. I'd love that. But the world does not revolve around autistic needs, nor should it revolve around neurotypical needs, but it should revolve around, like, a collective need. And so I can't go to the theater and be like, I love to clap my hands and scream, so y'all have to put up with it. Because that's just rude. It's disrespectful to everyone else in the theater. So if that's not a conversation that the individual can engage in, where you can explain, we need to find something different for you to do at the theater, then maybe you need to take them to, like, in Canada, we have a theater showing called Stars and Strollers, which is for anyone. They dim the lighting, they lower the sound, and you're allowed to, like, make noise and breastfeed and do whatever you want in the theater. So maybe you go to a movie showing that is more appropriate to meet your needs. Or, so I'm really like, I wouldn't alter someone's stims without them agreeing to it, unless it's physically harmful.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. So we do have sensory-friendly movies in New Jersey. I just feel like it's very hard for me to tell a parent as a professional, well, you just can't take your 4-year-old somewhere. Like, you just can't go out to eat as a family. You know, you can't go to a museum as a family.
I'd tell them.
Yeah, I mean, that's just hard because it's like, it's very difficult to say that to a parent. That,
right,
like,
but that's more about parent expectations than child quality of life. And that's an issue for me. Also, I just have to say I have a chemical burn on my eyebrow. That's why it looks like that. That's why I don't have makeup on. And I've been staring at it the whole time, so I needed to let y'all know.
I didn't notice it until you got right in front of the camera. So it makes me feeling better. And just if it makes you feel better, I actually got, like, reamed out one time during an MRI because I sneezed, as if that's, like, actually a, like, reaction in which I chose to do. And this is, like, the same thing. She, like, berated me and yelled at me. And I was like, dude, I'm, like, 30 years old. Like, I don't know if you have, like, a 3-year-old, but
right.
We're not going to do that. So I totally get that. So yeah, absolutely not okay. But all right, awesome. So Aidan, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Aidan is an education advocate. So I know a lot of times in education, we try to push for the least restrictive environment. So I want to hear your opinion on, you know, stimming in general. Should we alter it ever? I think we kind of like morphed the conversation, but that's fine. That's where it went. And what do you think about the idea that like a child who, in order to allow them to STEM, should be in a separate learning environment?
No, I think that that's such a great question, because we talk about some of the reasons why autistic individuals STEM, but we don't really necessarily get into exactly not only just the why, but we understand the science. We understand kind of, yes, that is a feature within autistic individuals. But one thing that really, I think, has plagued a lot of people is not understanding the actual reason of what's the payoff. What is that individual doing, and what are they doing that has a payoff for them? What do they get out of doing this particular stimming? And so I really liked Monica's scientific explanation, the physiology behind that. And I also think that it's important to note that stimming exists in everyone. There are people who, we label the word stimming, and we say that because there's certain prominent features that are seen within the autistic community, and it's easier to kind of put that as stimming because there's science behind it. But if you're, let's say, in a meeting, let's say you're in a very stressful situation, a lot of the times, and this is how forensic psychologists sometimes determine deceptions, that type of thing, it's called leakage. It's called leakage or micro expressions, where you're able to see certain things. So like if a person, a lot of the times, if you're rubbing your leg, a lot of times, like if you just are speaking and you're nervous, or you're like just like patting your leg lightly, that's a form of stimming that's seen in neurotypical individuals as well. So there's, I really gravitated to what Monica said, how we call it stimming when it's associated with autistic individuals. When it's with neurotypical people, there's nothing really to talk about. I think that that's easy to distinguish because there's subtleness between the autistic as well as the neurotypical. But then, as Jess pointed out, there are cases in which a stimming for an autistic individual might be something very unsafe, where they might like to run away. They might be a runner. When things get really too hard and they need to calm down, their choice is to run. Another thing might be scream or jump around in public. Now, I'm going to talk about this from the professional perspective, and then I'll get into quickly about my own experience, because I really wanted to answer the original question about the personal experiences that Lisa was alluding to. But on the professional side, I personally, and this is a very divisive issue, again, there's no right or wrong answer. I believe that the opinion I'm expressing is something that I think would be a great tool, but not everybody agrees with that. So what I want to say is that I personally have zero issue with a child stimming. One, because stimming is seen every single day. That is a hegemony that we see throughout life every day. There's the nervous twitch that somebody has, or the specific noise that you like to make. That's not just seen within autistic individuals. I have zero problem with if there's a child that perhaps likes to maybe flap their hands. That's something that's common that's seen within the autistic community. I personally don't have a problem with that. Where I do see concern is if the stimming is impeding their ability to reach their full potential. So what I mean by that is, if you are, let's say we have a child that really wants to make friends. He's an 8-year-old boy, wants to make friends, and part of what he does STEM-wise is for him to, let's say, flap his hands, or sometimes he utters certain noises at that point. In the real world, let's say if this was an adult or anything like that, the type of people that, in my America at least, I would say that that's absolutely correct. That's fine. He can do whatever he wants, and I'd still be his friend and everything like that. But we're talking about an 8-year-old boy. And we're talking about not masking. We're talking about how there's certain social situations in which, if the goal is to make some friends, unfortunately, not a lot of people at that age understands, or really, they get uncomfortable when they see something like that happen because they don't know what's going on. And so to that I say, I find that in extreme examples such as, I'm not a proponent for reducing that because I think that stimming is a really big way in reducing stress. And a lot of the times, autistic individuals are under significant stress as it is. They are constantly being told, you know, hey, you really got to look at this type of different perspective, or, you know, hey, do this, do that, and everything like that. It's a very stressful situation, especially when there's tons of kids. That's why I have a business, and that's why I wish to God one day I won't have to do this anymore. That's why there's so many kids that are in public high schools, public elementary, public middle schools, where they're in with 26 other kids. The noises are way too loud. Everything is really crazy or whatever. And they, once in a while, they might like to do certain things where they flap their hands, and you're going to say no to that? I mean, what kind of responsible behavior is that? They're not willing to invest the money. They're not willing to, you know, create a conducive environment in order to, and then you're going to say the one thing that's really helping this kid get through the day by occasionally doing those certain things, you're going to say no? That's not acceptable. That's really not something that's acceptable in my opinion. And so the remedy for this, I think that you have to really understand there's no blanket answer to this. There is absolutely no blanket answer to this. And it's unfair to come up with a generalization for all of that because every single person is different. But what I do think that the golden rule is there's different strokes for different folks. There are some people that, you know, and people say, you know, Aid, you're a little bit crazy for saying this, but I'll never forget. There is an episode of Dr. Phil where there was an individual who enjoyed putting on a dog costume and pretending to be a dog or anything like that. Now, to me, I find that to be very strange and odd and possibly maladaptive. But really the conclusion to be drawn from certain things is that if you're able to, let's say, do your activities of daily living, maintain healthy relationships, have a job, or do certain things and live in a functional life, and then when you have free time, you choose to do something that the society considers to be really weird or anything like that, I don't see a problem. If that's not impeding your ability to get along in this world in a functional way, it's just a prerogative. So I think that everything has to be taken by each case by case individually. And I think that, I think, by the way, one other thing I want to say on the professional side, one thing is just that I think we need to normalize stimming because it's seen everywhere. I don't even think that we should even call it stimming because when you hear the word stimming, that generates within my mind that that's delegated to special needs individuals. Everybody stims. I can't tell you how many times that, you know, whether it be, you could even say snapping your fingers or whistling or something like that. Like, you know, to say, to eliminate, you know, the stimming or whatever, sometimes that's the only coping skill. But I do believe that if stimming begins to consume your life and every single second is either stressful or you're excited or it's really something that's overpowered your life, there has to be a way to reduce that because otherwise there's a strong possibility you're not living to the best of your ability potential. So I think that it's a case-by-case basis professionally. Personally, it's hard for me to talk about it. I try to talk a little bit about it within the book, This is Autism. But Monica talked about this within her book specifically about masking. I mask every single day. And it's so sad and painful to admit that because I am an honest and straightforward person. When on the business side or on the professional side, or when there are certain political or certain things that really matter to me, there's no filter. There's absolutely no filter. There's no filter in me right now because this is very important to me. But if you were to, let's say, if this was a social situation where we're out to dinner or something like that, or whatever it may be, I can't tell you how many times, I'd say, not in a pathological, addicted to lying type of way, but I definitely mask myself because I try to express to people that I'm not impacted. And that's the thing. The thing is that there is absolutely no shame, nor is there no issues with being autistic. And that's something that's really expressed heavily within the book. I know that intellectually, I know that morally, and yet I find myself masking through many situations throughout the day. And part of that, I think, is survival. Part of that is, a lot of people, specifically the area that I'm in, and I can rationalize it and defend myself and say the area that I'm in is very nasty when it comes to autistic individuals and to people who are different, that type of thing. So that's a big part of that. But it's also a part of self-esteem. I have very little confidence in myself nor my abilities. And I think that masking, so, not showing, like some of the, to answer back to the original question, Lisa, so some stimming may be that I do, I'll watch a video repeatedly on YouTube if I really enjoy it and it like de-stresses me. I might watch certain clips or hear certain sound bites that I enjoy. Sometimes even at night or whatever, you sometimes see this in some people with autism, you sometimes kind of talk to yourself, and I don't necessarily mean to talk to myself, it's in my head, but you're kind of expressing it aloud and everything. That's what I do. But nobody would ever really see that if I was to be in a social situation. And it's not out of shame, it's out of fear. It's out of fear because I can't tell you how many times I've not been accepted before. And the area that I'm in for the past 18 years of my life, say 95% of the time has been, that's not acceptable. But I'm going to Kane University very soon, and it's amazing. There's so much diversity, and I think I can open my shell up and feel confident in my ability to show some of the sides to me that's autistic, because like I try to explain within the book, being autistic is not something that is this negative condition that really is something where there's no positive aspects. Some of the positive aspects that my autism presents, I tend to focus on the negatives. I don't want anybody to see the negative aspects because I'm so self-conscious. But the positive sides of my autism, I don't show either. And that's because I really try to mask it. And that's why I have a really hard time elevating relationships to the next level. I can do the hi, how are you? It's good to see you. Let's talk about your hobbies and friends. I can't get to that point where I'm in a social group or I'm going out to dinner or people are texting me first. I can never get to that point. And a lot of that has to do with insecurity. A lot of it has to do with the culture I'm in. And so I guess personally, I'd say professionally, again, yes, be by case basis. But personally, I think that over time, you will have the ability, and a lot of adults have talked about this, even within the book, people have said that, but I think over time, you find yourself a little bit more, and I'm the youngest of this panel, so I don't know specifically some of the experiences that you may have or if you've learned anything new, but hopefully I'll be able to learn more and will grow a little bit more confident and will be able to show that sides of the stimming, because I personally don't see a problem with it whatsoever as long as it's not dysfunctional. So, there's so much to talk about. I'm very passionate about this topic, and it's hard. I mean, it's hard for me to openly admit that I absolutely do mask. And even to the people who I love the most, I actually mask because I'm so self-conscious, and I shouldn't be, because I intellectually, morally know that there's nothing wrong. But I do it anyway. And it's because of so many other reasons. But the point is that there's a lot of things to uncover with this particular topic. It's not just one thing with stimming. There's a whole branch of things to talk about. So that would be my answer to those questions. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really hope that part of what we accomplish from this panel, Aidan, is like creating a world where you don't have to mask. And I think that's really what my mission is and my vision is. So the vision of my company has shifted. And now the mission and vision of my company is that the world is a more inclusive place for everyone to live. And that includes both neurotypical and autistic people. And I think that when we talk about this, if people watch this and understand that, I think it will shift. Like as a professional, I no longer tell parents, don't let your child line things up. I no longer tell parents, don't let your child stim. I used to tell parents like, oh no, if they line it up, break it up because, it's not okay. I used to tell parents that. I don't do that anymore. So, I think that by having these conversations, hopefully in our generation, the world will be a better place, not only for the next generation, but for everybody here too. So
it's sad. It's sad that it's at this point, but we're making progress. Everything, we're changing, but hopefully we'll get to a better point soon. Takes
Yeah.
time.
And it's funny you talked about like listening to like videos over and over. So like I was in a stressful place where I was experiencing fear, and I listened to the same song like 10 times. And I'm thinking that I would have never thought I never would have thought about it being a stim, but it's interesting because 10 years ago I would work with kids and I would tell them like, you can't watch the same video over and over, you have to pick a different video. And I'm like, well, I guess I do the same thing when I'm stressed out. So maybe it's not quite as different as we think.
I really just wanted to say one very quick thing about that, because that just goes to the point that I said about how not necessarily we should call it stimming or whatever, because I think it is important to distinguish certain things. Labels sometimes can be important, but what I will tell you is that if you go on YouTube, you go on all these memes or whatever, notice how everyone, and we know that not every single person is autistic when there is a video of 8 million viewers or whatever. But the top comments that gets 10,000 likes or something like that says, you know, Mom, you can only watch one more YouTube video. And then it says me, plays this video 8 hours or whatever. And so there are people that are neurotypical who do engage in these types of actions as well. And I mean, we see that on a daily basis. And so I really think that we need to normalize and talk about the human needs. Yes, it's important to talk about the special needs within autistic communities, but we need to talk about the human needs that are seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So I think we're going to wrap up on that note because it's almost 9 o'clock. But thank you everyone who came live. And if you watch us in recording, we're so grateful that you did. We have a plug for our book. If you haven't already got your copy, the book This is Autism is out. Many of the people that are here tonight participate in it. And we love your support. Yeah, Michelle got her copy. Aidan and I are like the only ones who haven't seen it yet because we ordered like the author's copies and a big case of them. So they're taking it. They were sweet time to
I'm waiting forever. Everybody else has gotten it. I haven't gotten it. It's ridiculous.
Well, to be fair, Aidan and I could have paid for expedited shipping, and we didn't. But we will get it in good time, and it just builds the suspense even more. Okay. So everyone, have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week back at the same time, same place, for another episode of Ask an Autistic.